There's something about lonely roads on rainy nights. Something that feels ancient, haunted even. Every now and then someone drives into the fog and comes back with a story. One that chills the bones and lingers long after the engine stops humming. Tonight I have one of those stories for you. If you enjoy stories that send shivers down your spine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale from the shadows. And now turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and let's begin. Mark had always liked the quiet of nighttime drives. The city felt too busy and loud, but out on the open road under a sky full of stars, he could breathe. Tonight, rain hit on his truck's windshield, and mist covered parts of the road, making everything seem kind of dreamlike. As he drove down the slick, winding road, he felt peaceful, the kind of calm that only shows up in the middle of the night. His headlights cut through the thick fog, lighting up patches of wet pavement and shining leaves. He was so lost in the quiet that he almost missed the figure standing by the roadside. A woman, drenched from head to toe, her shape just a dark outline against the trees. He slowed down, squinting to make sure he wasn't just seeing things. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly. She wore an old-fashioned floral dress, soaked and sticking to her like she'd been out in the rain for hours. Her arms hung limply by her sides, and her head was tilted down, wet hair covering most of her face. Something told him not to stop, but it was late. She was alone, and there was something so sad about the way she stood there that he couldn't just drive by. Against his better judgment, he slowed down and rolled down the window. "Are you all right?" he called, his voice barely louder than the rain. The woman looked up, and Mark felt a chill that went way beyond the cold night air. Her eyes were wide and empty, like she'd been staring into darkness for far too long. She didn't say anything, just nodded a little, then moved toward the passenger side. Mark leaned over to unlock the door, watching as she climbed in and closed it quietly. She brought with her an icy coldness, like winter itself had walked in. "Thanks," she whispered, her voice soft. "No problem," Mark replied, turning up the heater to fight the sudden chill in the truck. He glanced at her, noticing her old-fashioned clothes again. The dress looked like it was from the 70s, maybe older. The faint smell of wet earth and mold filled the truck, and he forced himself to focus back on the road. They sat in silence as he drove. Mark was usually good at small talk, but something about this woman made it hard to speak. She sat stiffly, her hands gripping the seatbelt, eyes locked on the road ahead like she was seeing something he couldn't. After a while, he finally spoke up. "So, where are you headed?" She didn't look at him, just kept staring forward. "There's a turnoff up ahead," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the sound of the rain. "It'll take me where I need to go." He raised his eyebrows. "I drive this road all the time. I don't remember any turnoff around here." She didn't answer, just kept staring out the windshield. Mark's discomfort grew, and he tightened his grip on the steering wheel, fighting the urge to pull over and let her out. But the rain was heavy, and he didn't want to leave her stranded. So he kept driving, the silence getting heavier with every mile. Finally, she pointed ahead, her hand shaking slightly. "There," she murmured. Mark squinted through the fog and, to his surprise, saw a narrow, winding dirt path off to the right that he'd never noticed before. It was barely visible, hidden among the thick trees, like it was meant to stay hidden. "Are you sure that's the way?" he asked, a strange feeling churning in his stomach. "Yes," she replied firmly. "Please, it's the only way." Reluctantly, he turned onto the path. The truck bounced over rocks and roots, tires slipping in the mud. The trees seemed to close in around them, branches scratching against the windows like claws. The rain slowed, but the air inside the truck got even colder, and Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The woman sat up straighter now, her fingers digging into her dress. Mark noticed she still hadn't blinked, her eyes fixed straight ahead, intense and unblinking. Trying to break the silence, he cleared his throat. "So, what were you doing out here alone?" She slowly turned her head to look at him, sending an icy feeling through his chest. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked, her voice calm but unsettling. The question caught him off guard. He let out a nervous laugh. Not really. I mean, I've never seen one. Have you?" A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes stayed distant. "I've seen things," she said quietly. "Things that most people wouldn't believe." An uncomfortable silence settled between them again. Mark's grip on the wheel tightened, and he started regretting his decision to turn onto this path. Just as he was about to suggest going back, they rounded a bend, and what he saw next made his heart skip a beat. Up ahead, barely visible through the fog, was a wrecked car. The vehicle was twisted around a tree, its hood crushed, and windows shattered. Vines had started to creep over the rusty metal, like the forest was trying to pull it in. Mark slowed down, his stomach churning with unease. The car looked like it had been there for years, abandoned and forgotten in the shadows of the forest. Inside, he could make out a faint shape slumped over the wheel. He glanced at the woman beside him, expecting some kind of reaction, but she just stared at the wreck with an expression that seemed almost peaceful, like she'd known it would be there. "Do you know this car?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around her seatbelt. "I was in that car." Mark's heart raced. He let out a shaky laugh, trying to shake off the creeping fear. "Come on, you're joking, right?" Her face softened, and she looked at him with an emptiness he couldn't quite understand. "No," she said quietly. "I was in that car. I waited for someone to help me, just like you." A shiver ran through him. "But you're here now, with me." She tilted her head, giving him a sad smile. "Sometimes, people like me, we don't get to leave. We just stay, waiting, hoping." She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold glass of the window as she looked back at the car. Before he could react, the figure inside the wreck moved, turning slowly to face them. Mark's stomach twisted as he saw a face, pale and ghostly, pressing against the shattered glass of the wrecked car. It was her face. Mark's mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. He looked from the woman beside him to the figure in the car. They were the same. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and sad, "for stopping. No one ever stops." He looked back at her, but the passenger seat was empty. The icy chill in the truck lifted, replaced by a stuffy warmth that made him feel lightheaded. He blinked, and when he opened his eyes again, he was parked back on the main road. The dirt path was gone, as if it had never been there. Rain tapped against the truck's roof, and the road was empty. His headlights shone only on the wet pavement stretching out in front of him. Mark sat there, heart pounding, his mind still reeling from what he'd just experienced. Eventually, he forced himself to drive on, his mind racing with questions. He tried to forget the woman's face, the strange emptiness in her eyes, the wreck that had somehow disappeared along with her. But she lingered in his thoughts, a shadow he couldn't shake. He didn't stop driving until he reached the lights of a small diner. Stumbling inside, he ordered coffee, needing the warmth and the noise of other people. An older waitress noticed how shaken he looked and brought him a cup without asking. As he sipped, he found himself asking, "Have you heard of a car wreck around here? A woman from a long time ago?" The waitress's face went pale and she nodded slowly. "You saw her, didn't you?" she whispered. "They say she died on that road back in the 70s. People see her sometimes, always in the rain, always waiting. But once she gets in your car, you'll never forget her." Mark's hands trembled as he held the cup. He looked out the window at the rain, feeling like she was still watching him, still waiting by the roadside in the fog. Mark sat in the diner for what felt like hours, clutching the warm coffee cup in his trembling hands. The waitress's words echoed in his mind, each syllable solidifying the reality of what he had just experienced. Always waiting. But Mark couldn't just let it end there. The image of the woman, her soaked dress, her hollow eyes, and her sad smile haunted him. He had to do something. He had to help her. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle as Mark pulled into the parking lot of the nearest police station. His boots splashed in shallow puddles as he hurried inside, his heart racing. The officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow as Mark approached, soaked and visibly shaken. "Sir, can I help you?" the officer asked. Mark took a deep breath. "You need to come with me. There's a car in the woods off the old highway road. I think someone died there a long time ago, but the car is still there." The officer exchanged a skeptical glance with a colleague, but must have seen the sincerity or the fear in Mark's eyes. Soon after, Mark found himself leading a small team of officers down the same stretch of road. The mist was starting to lift, and the moon peeked faintly through the thinning clouds. "It was here," Mark said, slowing down. "There was a turnoff, right here." To his astonishment, the narrow dirt path was visible again, though barely. Overgrown with weeds and nearly concealed by tree branches, it was easy to miss. "We'll check it out," one of the officers said, motioning for Mark to stay back as they carefully maneuvered their vehicles onto the path. The forest seemed quieter this time, heavier with anticipation. And then they found it. The car was still there, twisted around the tree, its shattered glass glinting faintly in the flashlight beams. The officers approached cautiously, inspecting the rusted wreckage. One officer crouched by the driver's side and froze. Mark's chest tightened as he watched the officers mark the scene and call in additional support. It didn't take long for them to confirm what Mark already knew. The car had been there for decades, and the skeletal remains inside matched the description of a young woman who had gone missing in the early 1970s. As the officers worked, Mark stepped back, staring at the wreck. For a brief moment, he thought he saw her. The woman in the floral dress, standing among the trees, her figure faint and transparent. But this time, she wasn't sad. She wasn't waiting. She was smiling. And then, she was gone. Mark felt a weight lift from his chest. She was finally at peace. When he returned to his truck, he sat quietly for a long time, staring out into the night. The road ahead was clear now. The mist had faded, and the rain had stopped. Sometimes, he thought, the dead just need someone to see them, to hear them, and to help them find their way home. Not every ghost is trapped in a house. Some are still out there, waiting in the rain. If you made it out, subscribe. But if you didn't, well, you'll be seeing her again soon. Stay safe, and stay scared.